Now these are available at the click of a button to anybody who at least knows how to find it. As of literally yesterday, I have, because we were sitting down talking about what are we going to share with the people, and you said, Nehemiah, you found the 1,000 manuscripts with the name because all these manuscripts are online. Is the Joseph Father of Mary manuscript up online? And I said, I don't know, I didn't look. So we looked and it was. Now we have a high resolution. This one is in grayscale. It's much better quality image than what we had before. And you can clearly see, if you read Hebrew, it's as clear as day.
As we print this out, you can see the fibers.
Oh, and the other one is in color. You can actually see like wrinkles in the leather that it's written on, in the parchment. It's unbelievable. Yeah, you see like where there were fibers and wrinkles in the leather. It's of that high quality, this color photograph from Oxford University. And now what, back in the day, not that long ago, I had to, pull the microfilm and show you black and white and try to do something with it. Now these are available at the click of a button to anybody who at least knows how to find it, right? Which that's not so small thing either. But what I love that you're going to be doing is sharing this with people on television where they can see for themselves. Don't believe the Jew from Jerusalem that it's there in the manuscript, the Hebrew manuscript. You can see it for yourself.
Again, we have Nehemiah Gordon with us, and Nehemiah is now, after more than 2 decades of research, is now going to be able to bring out to us some of the Hebrew versions of the other Gospels that have never been seen outside of the rarefied climate of the Vatican and other areas around the world where he has been investigating this. Nehemiah, it is good to have you back with us.
Great to be here, Michael. Shalom.
Shalom. If you could take us back, 20 years ago, what you were having to do for these manuscripts.
Oh, wow.
It really was, if they weren't able to get in and photograph all these manuscripts in St. Petersburg, you wouldn't have had any access to these things. Right. And take us back there, because what's developed lately is incredible.
Well, what really illustrates this for me, Michael, and it's a great picture of what happened, is there was this very important collection of Jewish manuscripts in Moscow that were held by this man named Günzburg. So the Günzburg collection was purchased in 1917 by what later became the National Library of Israel, was at the time just the Library of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And it was being boxed up to be sent to Jerusalem, was purchased with cash money, boxed up to be sent to Jerusalem. And what happened in 1917? The communists came to power. They hated Jews, hated Jewish history, just as they hated Christians and Christian history. These were rabid atheists, and they stuck them in a warehouse somewhere. And we waited for decades to get these manuscripts that are ours, that we paid for, and we weren't allowed to see them. Now, at the same time that these manuscripts were freezing in Moscow, the Günzburg collection, there was another collection called the Furkovich collection, which had been collected by a Karaite Jew in the 1800s named Abraham Furkovich. He sold his manuscripts, which is the largest collection of Hebrew manuscripts in the world to this day. He sold them to what was the Russian Imperial Library, and what later became the Russian National Library. So these manuscripts were known in St. Petersburg, which at one time was Leningrad, and now once again is St. Petersburg. These manuscripts were known, and scholars managed to get one Bible manuscript, which became the most important Bible manuscript in the world after the Aleppo Codex. It was called the Leningrad Codex. Well, it turns out Leningrad Codex is a bit of a misnomer, because there are over 3,000 codexes of the Bible in Leningrad, in St. Petersburg. And one of the really important things that's happened with this worldwide digitization of manuscripts is I can now go to the National Library of Israel, and instead of pulling out these microfilms and swirling them, I can actually pull it up on the computer and see those manuscripts in a much more efficient way.
So how did these manuscripts then turn into microfilm to where you could access them?
So what happened is, when the Soviet Union fell, the Israeli government went into full gear. They said, okay, we don't know how long it is till the next fascist regime, communist regime comes to power. And they did a couple of things. One of the things they actually did at the very same time is they sent a mission over to Ethiopia to get the final Jews they could out of Ethiopia, because when the Soviet Union fell, the communist regime in Ethiopia that was keeping the Jews hostage also fell, and they brought over tens of thousands of Jews. So at the same time they were doing that, they said, we're going to get the manuscripts out of Ethiopia. We're going to get the Jews out of Ethiopia. Let's get the manuscripts, at least images, out of the former Soviet Union. So they sent over a mission to St. Petersburg, Russia, and they were allowed to photograph thousands of Bible manuscripts and other Hebrew and Jewish manuscripts. And those microfilms are now held at the National Library of Israel. And what happened in the last year is they took those microfilms, ran them through this infrared digitization machine so they could get high resolution images off of the microfilms. And now you can go to the National Library of Israel, and instead of pulling out a microfilm, which is very tedious and slow, you just pull it up on your computer. Well, what I didn't know at the time, but I quickly discovered as I started to search, is there's this worldwide project to digitize all Hebrew manuscripts all over the world. And it's being led by three major institutions. One is, the first two, honestly, I hadn't really heard of before. One is called the Polonsky Foundation. There's this benefactor named Dr. Leonard Polonsky who contacted the Vatican and Oxford University, and he's convinced them to digitize, I guess with a large donation and grant, to digitize all of their manuscripts and make them available free to the public. And then there's also something called the Friedberg Jewish Manuscript Society. And of course, really, from my perspective, the ones who are leading this effort with their knowledge is the National Library of Israel, which has scholars who can actually look at the manuscripts from the Vatican and say, okay, this is from this century and this is, this document. They're still in the process of cataloging everything, but so these three institutions and others, the British Library was involved, and the Vatican, of course, had to agree to it, right? And the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York has put out over 1,000 Bible manuscripts. So altogether, we have an unprecedented access to manuscripts of the Bible and other sources. I remember back in the day, and this is sometime around 2003 or thereabouts, I was looking for Hebrew Matthew manuscripts, and I had a lead on one manuscript in St. Petersburg, Russia. And so I wrote it on the thing on a little piece of paper, handed it to the librarian. 15 minutes later, he comes back, he gives me this roll, and I pull it out, and I'm swirling, and I'm looking at it, and I almost shouted, Michael. Because in there, I found Hebrew Matthew, but I also found in Hebrew Mark, Luke, and John. Now, at the time, I didn't know what those texts were, and today I can tell you I don't think those are Hebrew originals. Right, and
this is the first time you're telling me that you found those at that time. You told me that you found some others, but you can't say anything about it. Right. And so I'm hearing it for the first time.
And I've never said this before publicly.
Right.
People for years have asked me, are there other Hebrew documents other than Hebrew Matthew? And I say nothing that's been published. Which means I can't talk about it. Well, now we have these. Now these have gone out to the world.
Wait! I have to ask you. You took the microfilm after you found that back to the librarian, and he asked you.
He says to me, "Did you find anything interesting?" And I've told this story before. Did you find anything interesting in that microfilm? And I'm thinking, does he know about the Hebrew Mark, Luke, and John that I saw there? And he didn't. So I said to him, rather than answering, why are you asking that? And he said, oh, because nobody has ever looked at that microfilm before. This was like sometime around the early 2000s. These microfilms have been made in 90, 91. And so they've been sitting there for over 10 years, and no one had ever pulled out that microfilm to look at it.
And how long would it take Hebrew scholars that fluently read it, how long would it take them to look through and decipher all these things?
Many lifetimes. Just to look at them and study them would take many lifetimes.
And you found Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
In Hebrew. Now, the Matthew I was expecting to find, I certainly wasn't. And here's the really cool thing. At the end of Hebrew Matthew, and this is in just about every manuscript of Hebrew Matthew, it says, thus ends the Gospel of Matthew, and now shall come the Gospel of Mark. And you see that in these manuscripts, but there's no Mark. It's not there, except for in this manuscript from St. Petersburg, Russia, and it turns out another manuscript. There's two manuscripts that have that. Now, at the time I saw these, I said, I don't know if these are Hebrew originals or not, or if they're just translated from some other language. I can now tell you that they are translated from a language called Catalan, that these are two unknown copies of the Catalan Gospels that are also in the Vatican. And we actually have a mutual friend who's
Miles Jones. He was with us on the program for Shabbat Night Live. Right. A brilliant man, and he was...
well, and what he's doing is he's studying the Hebrew text of these four Gospels, his Matthew's different, of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that are translated from the Catalan language into Hebrew, and you're finding all kinds of really interesting things that, how do you explain that we see something in the Hebrew that isn't in the Greek, but it's, in this case, for a fact it's translated from Catalan, which is a dialect of Spanish. Well, until he watches this episode, Michael, even Miles Jones doesn't know about these two other manuscripts of his Catalan Gospels.
I'm thinking I was going to call him as soon as we get off. But,
probably. Okay, so...
Because I know he's very excited about this. And
he only has one manuscript from the Vatican, EBR 100. Now he's got two more manuscripts that he can use to compare and study, which is extremely important when you're studying manuscripts. He finds some really interesting things, and when I was talking to him, I sat down with him and talked with him for hours and hours and hours in, I believe it was in San Antonio or Dallas, and what came to mind as he was describing this is an article that was written by this scholar named William Darby. Darby was this guy who was really against the idea of Hebrew Matthew. Howard had come out with Hebrew Matthew, and Darby said, look, we really can't deny that there's some important readings in this Hebrew Matthew. We're finding things here we don't find anywhere else in any other Greek or Latin text.
And they solve problems that Greek scholars just boiled over for hundreds of years.
So Darby offers another very interesting solution, let's put it that way. He says, clearly this isn't, and I'm paraphrasing here, right? He says, this doesn't look like it's translated from Greek or Latin, but maybe it's translated into Hebrew, because he knows it can't be a Hebrew original, right? That's the starting point for people like Darby. It can't be a Hebrew original. So instead he proposes maybe this was translated from some old Greek or Latin text that we don't have anymore, that's closer to the original Greek, and therefore it brings us these interesting readings that we don't have in our standard Greek. In other words, it started out in Greek, was translated into Latin, and then into Hebrew, and our Hebrew that we have brings us stuff from the original text that's even now different in the Greek. It seems like a lot of steps. I mean, Occam's razor says that all things being equal, the simplest explanation is the best. In either way, even if Darby is right, that means there's immense value in these Hebrew documents. Even if they are translated from some lost Latin or Greek text, they're bringing us things we don't have in our current Latin or Greek text.
But they're still not going to explain the figures of speech that only make sense in Hebrew.
Not in Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew, but maybe in some of the other documents. And certainly that explains in the Catalan Hebrew Gospels, meaning that can explain why we see these things in the Catalan Hebrew Gospels that Miles Jones is studying that blows you away. You look at this and you say, this makes so much more sense than what's in the Greek, and it ties into all kinds of things. So maybe they were translated into Hebrew from some lost version we don't have. Now, with all that said, can we talk about the Hebrew Revelation, Sloan 273 from the British Library? Would you let me pull that up?
Let's go to Revelation.
Okay.
This is...
Revelation chapter 1. This really is, it's one of these golden nuggets that
I'm going to follow along with the King James here.
All right. So I'm going to start in verse 17. It says, "V'kasher ha'iti oto nafalti el raglav kemet." And when I saw him, I fell upon at his feet like a dead person. V'sam hayad yamino alai. And he
let me give you the context.
Yeah.
John, this is the revelation that John receives. He sees Yeshua in his glorified body, and he is he's wiped out. He just falls down like a dead man at his feet. There's no strength in him.
Vayomer, and he said, and I guess Yeshua is speaking here from the context, Al tira ani harishon v'acharon. Do not be afraid or do not fear. I am the first and the last. Ve'achai v'ha'iti met. And the one who lives, and I was dead.
The first and the last?
That's what it says.
Yeah.
Do you have something different?
No, I was just...
okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, okay. I was dead, and I'm alive and was dead. V'hinei chai ani le'olmei olamim, and I live forever. Behold, I live forever. Amen. And he says, V'yesh li et hamasmirim hamavet v'asheol. And I have the nails of death and Sheol. That's what it says in this manuscript. Anybody can go online and see this in the British Library website. You can go to my website, nehemiahswall.com, see the full text and translation of this, transcribed into modern Hebrew and translated. He says, I have the nails of death and Sheol.
The nails of death and hell, Sheol.
Yeah.
King James says keys.
The keys.
The keys.
And you got to wonder whether this is a Hebrew original or it's translated from some lost Latin or Greek text. There's something going on here. Keys, and you think, well, okay, nail is just a mistake, right? But nails, there's some association in the New Testament about nails. Well, what's the first thing you hear about, Michael, when you hear Yeshua holding nails?
The nails that nailed him to the cross. Yeah, this is
interesting.
This
so
talks about in Colossians. Nailing the doctrines and commandments of men to the cross in his death.
So he talks about the nails of death and Sheol, and there it has keys. And I'm thinking, this is weird. This is very strange. So I look up in Jewish sources, and I find immediately 2 references to nails that are related to this. One reference is it talks about how people take nails, and this is 2,000 years ago. They take nails and they bend them, and they stick them into a door and use them as a key, which is really interesting.
Bent nails
used
as a key.
Right.
Now, I have held, Nehemiah, I've held in my hands just handfuls of 9-inch nails from the crucifixion site. This is in Wyatt's museum when I was helping to Ron Wyatt to build his museum and to set this up. And these rusty old nails, and he said that this is what he was able to bring back from the crucifixion site in the excavation site. And these nails were bent on the ends. Because as they nailed them through the wrist and through the feet of the people, then they would bend them over with the hammers, bend them over. So they're literally bent nails that could be the same as the keys.
Right, and you could actually go to the Israel Museum, and there's this is the only time it's ever been found in archaeology. They found an ankle bone with a nail through it at a place called Givat HaMivtar. It's at the Israel Museum. It's not from Yeshua. It's from a man whose name was Chag Kol. We don't know much about him, but we know he was crucified. And you see there the exact same thing. The nail is bent on the end so that this guy Chag Kol wouldn't pull his leg out. Right? He's stuck in the cross. And it's actually the only other example we know from archaeology of a person being crucified with nails. But there it is. Some poor innocent Jew who was murdered by the Romans, crucified. Now, the Hebrew version, Sloan 273 in the British Library, has nails. The Greek, every Greek text has keys, and we find out that people would turn nails and use them as keys, and we find this can't be a coincidence, Michael.
Right.
Something's going on here with these texts, and there was the Hebrew opens up another dimension that we're not seeing in the Greek. One other reference I found, Michael, which is really cool.
And the nails of death and the grave.
Right, so what does that mean? So what does it mean he has the nails of, the keys of death and Sheol, or the nails? Look, this is coming from the Jewish perspective, reading a Hebrew text. It's pretty clear to me what he's saying is what Isaiah talks about, that death is going to be defeated. He's going to overthrow and destroy Sheol, right? And when the end times comes, people aren't going to die anymore. And what he's saying is, I've got the keys to get you out of death and Sheol. I think that's what he's saying.
That's
powerful stuff, really powerful, and it's nails here. Wow. So what are the keys according to the Hebrew Sloan 273 in the British Library? They're the nails of the crucifixion. That's cool stuff. Wow. I mean, this is heavy stuff, Michael. This is really cool. There's a lot going on here.
You'd never see it in just reading the King James or the Greek.
Right. You'd never find that.
Just in the Hebrew.
And so the Hebrew opens up a new dimension, and whether it's the Hebrew original or like Darby said and what Miles Jones is seeming to discover in the Catalan Hebrew Gospels is maybe these things were translated from some lost Greek or Latin, but we're getting information here that is missing in the Greek. I mean, this is an important area of research, Michael, and it breaks my heart. I want to share a story of something that happened. We're running out of time, but I got to share this story. So I was, doing this, so T-Bone's pestering me. Let's look for New Testament stuff. Let's look for New Testament stuff. And I tell him about that Hebrew Sloan 273, which I had known about for over 15 years. And I just couldn't find it. And within 1 hour, he finds it on the British Library website. Because and again, it's what's happened in the last year.
The
worldwide digitization project has changed the world. We can now access this document. Now, there was one document that was not online. I want to show this to people. This has never been publicly shown before.
Okay.
This document, this is a brand new discovery that turns out, and I'd known about this for years, I just didn't have access to it. It turns out there's a manuscript in Dublin, at a library in Dublin, and here we are about to see it. So this is it. And this is, now Sloan 273, Michael, is chapter 1, and it breaks off in the middle of chapter 2 of the book of Revelation. The rest of the book of Revelation continues here in chapter 2 in this manuscript from Dublin, in Hebrew. So no one's ever seen this?
No one's ever seen this before. I haven't even seen this before.
This is a Hebrew manuscript of the book. Now, is this a Hebrew original or translated from Greek? I don't know. I haven't even had time to study it. I'm looking for my 1,000 instances of Yehovah. But what's really interesting about this is I took this to a scholar in Israel who is probably the top expert in the world about Hebrew manuscripts in general. And I said, there's no record of this manuscript in any of the databases in Israel. I have on this flash drive photos. I want to give this to you. I had to contact the library in Dublin and say to them, hey, I'm looking for this manuscript. They said, well, that doesn't exist. Oh, you mean this other manuscript? In other words, I had the wrong reference number. And so they discovered that through great research, these wonderful people in Dublin found the correct reference number and then were able to send me photographs. I bought these photographs from them and I took them to this scholar in Israel and said, would you please catalog this so that everybody else knows about this, right? I don't want to keep it as a secret. Mm-hmm. And this hasn't been digitized. It's not online. People who are seeing this on their television screens are seeing it for the first time. This scholar in Israel says to me, well, I would need high-resolution TIFFs in order to digitize this. I said, I have high-resolution TIFFs. They're right here on this flash drive. And then the scholar responds and says, that's New Testament stuff, isn't it? We don't really care about that. And you might say, wait a minute, the rabbis pray every day for the Messiah to come, right? And there's a question, will the Messiah come or come back between Jews and Christians? But the rabbis say, we do want the Messiah to come. But on some level, and I've heard rabbis say this, not publicly, but I've heard rabbis say this.
Party?
Every rabbi today is the high priest of his own little temple.
Right.
He's got his synagogue and he's the authority there. And the Messiah shows up, whatever his name is, and all of a sudden you're this, you're just some guy, right? So there's some resistance, and I've heard rabbis say this. I've heard them say it in their synagogues. I don't know if they would say it too publicly, but I've heard them say in their synagogues, we don't actually want the Messiah to come. And it's not because they think the Messiah is Yeshua. They don't know who the Messiah is. They're just thinking like, look, we got a good thing. Why mess with it? Why mess with it?
Well, I would assert that back in the first century, that was the situation back then.
Oh, yeah. I mean, to some extent, that was definitely the situation. And today it's worse. Because at least then we had a high priest in the temple, right? And then the high priest is thinking, I'm God's chosen to be in the temple, the Messiah, and this is actually something we see in the book of Zechariah, I believe it's chapter 14, where it talks about there's this rivalry between the high priest and the Davidic king, and they're both anointed with oil. At least that's how Jews understand it. And it's talking about how in the end times there will be harmony between these two institutions, which then, of course, in Hebrews brings up that whole allegory of Yeshua being both positions. Mm-hmm. But in any event, there was an actual rivalry. The high priest of the temple's thinking, I was anointed with oil, which means I'm a Mashiach. You want to bring a Davidic Mashiach, a Davidic king? That's competition. I don't need that, right? I mean, this was the psychology back then, and it's still alive to some extent today. And I thought, wow. For years I've had this sneaking suspicion, this theory, that the reason people aren't studying these texts is because the Jews who are experts in Hebrew don't care about them, and the Christians who are experts in Greek are, first of all, invested in the Greek. Yeah, and they don't have the Hebrew expertise. Yeah. And it was confirmed in some way by this scholar saying to me, oh, that's just New Testament stuff. That's just Christian stuff. What do you mean this is a Hebrew document that nobody else knows about? I want the world to know about it. And the way to get it known about is to put it in the catalog so any scholar can find this. And they wouldn't do it. And so it's not just a theory anymore. That, you know, these I call this we call this in Hebrew, it's fallen between the chairs, or in English you say it falls between the cracks, right? You know, it's missed because it's like, in a sense, interdisciplinary, right? You've got the Hebrew experts and the New Testament experts, and they're generally different people and have different interests, right? They're not interested in the same thing, but this should be important. And look, there's one manuscript that I got from the Cambridge University. This was a manuscript that was very difficult to get. It wasn't digitized. They wanted $750 for the photos. I paid it. Get the photos, and I, within an hour of studying it, could tell you 100%, number one, this is a manuscript translated from Greek, and number two, it really has no value as a Hebrew text, because it just was a straight translation from Greek. It's not like these other things we're talking about. So did I waste $750? Absolutely not. Now I know that that manuscript is a dead end, and I also have something to compare these other manuscripts to. I know what a Greek translation sounds like now, a pretty bad Greek translation, right? So it was a very important research. I mean, this is what happens in research. Sometimes you hit a dead end, but that dead end is important too. You know, when you
even the dead ends are expensive.
Well, they're expensive too. Well, you know, it kind of reminds me in the Siloam tunnel, in Hezekiah's tunnel in Jerusalem. It's an ancient water tunnel that they dug in order to bring water into the city of Jerusalem during the Assyrian siege. And it's mentioned in Isaiah and it's mentioned in Kings. And what they did is they dug from two different ends, and it's S-shaped, and they met in the middle. Well, what you see as you're walking through this tunnel are what the archaeologists call false starts. So they dig, and then they're going in this direction. They realize, uh-oh, that's the wrong direction. So they go back, and they're digging through solid limestone with iron axes and adze, and then they, you know, so it's kind of like a false start, and you realize, okay, that's not the direction we need to go. Let's back up a little bit and go in the other direction, right? And there's a lot of false starts. But without those false starts, they would have never found their way. So what I've come to the conclusion after years of study is, you know, finding the answer as no is not a bad thing. I don't need the answer always to be yes. I don't need every manuscript to be the most important manuscript in the world. I just want to know the truth. And whatever that truth is, I know it will set me free. It will set me free. Can I get an amen, Michael?
Amen.
The truth will set you free. So I do want to share something that I found. So this is from the British Library. It's called Royal Manuscript 16A2. Anybody can go to the library website, the website of the British Library, and see this manuscript for themselves. And you'll look on folio 24R, and you'll find the Epistle of James in Hebrew. Now, is this a Hebrew original, or was it translated from Greek? That's very difficult to say. We don't know exactly how this even got into the royal collection. Some of the sources seem to indicate it was given as a gift to King Henry VIII. What's really interesting to me about it is that the script is not a typical script that would be used by Christian scholars. This is a script that was used by Sephardic Jews, very similar to what we call Rashi script, but it has certain characteristics that you can clearly identify. There's a Sephardic Jew who wrote this. And here we have a passage, Epistle of James, chapter 1, verse 7. And what do we have here? You can see it, people. Yehovah with the vowels. The same vowels we found in 1,034 Hebrew Bible manuscripts of the Old Testament, we now find in this manuscript of the Epistle of James in Hebrew. I mean, it's incredible. I want to share another one if you'll let me here.
Hey, let me point out something on this. James, you know, which he says he's a servant of Yeshua the Messiah to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Through the rest of his letter, there's nothing indicating that he's writing to believers even. He's stating that he is, but nothing else is indicative of that. And this could be that he's writing this to Jewish people in the synagogues.
In other words, any Jew, whether you believed in Yeshua as the Messiah or not, would read the Epistle of James and be like, wow, this is some great stuff, right? Other than the opening line, there's no hint anywhere that there's anything uniquely what could later be called Christian in it. Can I read to you from, just really quickly, you mentioned before James was an epistle written in Hebrew to the 12. I just want to quickly read to you from the British Library, this manuscript that was in the Royal Collection, 16A2, Michtav Yaakov HaShaliach, the letter of Yaakov the Shaliach, the messenger. Amal Yaakov Eved Elohim Vadonai Yeshua HaMashiach, saith Jacob, Yaakov, the servant of God, and Lord Yeshua the Messiah, Lishnei Masar Shvatim HaMefuzarim Shalom Lachem, to the 12 tribes, peace to you. And I read that in Hebrew, and it's written in the Sephardic script, the Sephardic hand, and I got to wonder, when he sent out this letter, maybe he sent out one in Greek, and maybe he sent another one out in Hebrew, and maybe, just maybe, we don't know, this is a descendant of that manuscript that was then handed to King Henry VIII as a gift to some Jewish community that had received it. I don't know. There's all kinds of things out there, Michael, that nobody is bothering to study. Now, the thing I've been waiting now weeks to share, and I hope you're going to let me share it, is the issue of what we found in the Vatican. Can I at least set it up and tell the people what I found in the Vatican?
Okay, all right.
And it really came out of that research I was doing with Matthew 23. I had found these manuscripts of Hebrew Matthew. George Howard found 9, and I had found 14, and I said, there's got to be more. And it turned out by the time we did that video, I believe we had 26, and later I found 2 more. But the process was I would get these microfilms, and I would put them on the reader, analog reader, and I'm swirling them, looking through them. And one of these microfilms turned out it was in the Vatican, and it said miscellaneous. And I said, well, that's interesting. Let's see what's miscellaneous. And as I'm looking through, I'm realizing this is a junk box. They have a loose page.
What do you mean by junk box?
Well, I was once told by a mechanic, when you put a car back together and you're left with 3 extra bolts, you just throw them in the junk box. So this is what would happen in the Vatican. Somebody was reading a manuscript. They, maybe 10 manuscripts. They'd put them back in the shelf, and they'd see on the table there was an extra page left there. And they, well, what do we do with this? We don't know where it goes. We put it in the junk box. And
these are ancient manuscripts that pages do come out and
all the time.
Don't know what to do with them.
They open up a book nobody's opened up for 200 years, and there's worms in there eating the book, and all kinds of things are happening, right? And there's mold, all kinds of problems you're having with manuscripts. And so they would put these pages in the junk box. So I'm looking at this microfilm at the National Library of Israel, and it's a microfilm of a junk box. Now, back then I only had it black and white. What's new and why I'm able to share this now publicly is now I've got the high resolution color images because of this worldwide project of digitizing Hebrew manuscripts. And I'm going to show people here for the first time some of the other pages from the junk box. So here, for example, we have a page from the junk box, and you can see it says Bibliotheca Apostolica Vaticana, the Apostolic Library of the Vatican. And this is some page of some document that was fell out of a book or was torn out of a book, and it's some sort of Kabbalistic work or something.
Yeah, it's got a star.
Yeah, it's got some weird drawings on it. It's some kind of Kabbalistic document. Here's another page from some other book completely. It's actually an early printed book. And this is a book of how to teach children. It's got the Aleph Bet with all the different combinations of the vowels. And there's a picture here of the very simple wood etching, they call these, where the teacher has, spoil the rod, spare the rod, spoil the child, it's expressing. And it talks here about the young boy. And it's literally a children's book that fell out of some book, early book they had, or early printed book. Put it in the junk box.
Yeah, so it's Hebrew, so it's not anything that concerns them.
Well, even if it concerns them, they don't know what to do with it, right? Because they had, up until the last decade or so, the Hebrew manuscripts in the Vatican had never been cataloged. It was scholars from the National Library of Israel that went to the library for the first time and cataloged it from the Institute of Microfilmed Hebrew Manuscripts. Nobody had ever cataloged it because they couldn't read Hebrew. Right? Occasionally they'd look at a book here, a book there. They had some idea it was there, but they didn't have a systematic idea. Here's another page, which is from a book in German. I don't even know if it's doing in there, if it's even a Jewish book. This was just a junk box where they put stuff. Most of them are Hebrew books. And as I'm looking through the junk box, I'm seeing hundreds of pages from many different books. And all of a sudden I come across a page, and I look at this and I say, wait a minute. That's a gospel in Hebrew. And first I found Luke, and there were 3 pages of Luke, and then I found a single page from the Gospel of John. Can I read that to the people, what it says? People, this is the first time this is being shown publicly to the world. I don't know where this came from, other than that it's from the Vatican. Where the Vatican got it from, I don't know. What's really cool is at the bottom of the page.
It's just one page.
It's just one page from John. At the bottom of the page, you have what they call a hanging word. It's a single word without vowels that is the first word from the next page.
And without the vowels, that tells you that it continues on to the next page.
Oh, yeah. So what they would do is they put the first word of the next page at the bottom of the previous page. So you turn the page and you know what to look for. And if the pages aren't in order, that's very helpful, of course. So we know there was another page. We just don't have it. So let me read you for the first time from the Gospel of John in the Vatican Library, from the junk box of the Vatican Library. I mean, this truly is a treasure, right? There's movies about things like this, like, American Treasure, and I hate to say it, but the Da Vinci Code, where there's some treasure somewhere we're going to find, and I found it in a microfilm of the junk box in the Vatican. And this has never been talked about publicly as far as I know. And certainly when I found it, nobody knew about this around 17 years ago or so. Here's what it says. I'll read it in Hebrew and then translate it. Habsorah kedosha shel Yeshua HaMashiach kefi Yochanan. The holy gospel of Yeshua the Mashiach according to Yochanan. Perek Rishon, chapter 1. Bereshit haya hadavar, v'hadavar haya etzel ha'elohim, v'ha'elohim hu haya hadavar. In the beginning was the word, the davar, and the word was next to Elohim. Now, that word next to is the Hebrew word etzel. You might be able to translate that as with. I think it's a bit of a stretch.
With is in King James.
Right, with, and the word was with God. Here it's etzel, which is next to. And I saw that, I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. Well, you have this verse in the New Testament. It's in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 20, which he worked in Christ, which he raised him from the dead, and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly places.
That's very close to.
I gotta wonder.
Next to.
I gotta wonder. It's literally next to, right? At the right hand. Hebrews 8:1. Now, this is the main point of the things we are saying. We have such a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens. So I gotta wonder if that's what's going on in this Hebrew edition of this Hebrew text of John that I've discovered in the Vatican. And it goes on and it says...
that goes back to the Psalms. Seated at my right hand till I make thy
Psalm
enemies
110.
thy footstool.
Okay. Wow. So, in the beginning, okay, we read that. V'Elohim hu haya davar, zeh haya bereshit etzel ha'elohim. This was in the beginning next to Elohim. Of course, Elohim is the Hebrew word for God. It says... כל הדברים נעשו בו, ומבלעדיו לא נעשה דבר מכל אשר היה. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made from all that was. בו היו החיים, in him was life. והחיים היו אור האנשים, and life was the light of men. והאור היה זורח באפלות, והאפלות לא הכילוהו. And the light was shining forth in the darkness, and the darkness could not contain it, meaning the light. Vayihi ish echad shaluach me'et Elohim u'shmo Yochanan. And there was a certain man sent from God, and his name was Yochanan. That's Hebrew for John. And it goes on and it says, Zeh ba be'edut laha'id hala'or leman asher ya'aminu hakol ba'avuro. This one came in testimony to testify concerning the light, in order that they would believe everything because of him. Hu lo haya davar. He was not the light, but only testifying concerning the light, meaning John. It was true light to shed light on every man who enters into this world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him. And the world did not recognize him. Ba el moladato mamash ubnei beito lo kibluhu. He came to his true homeland or birthplace, and the children of his house did not accept him. L'chol asher kiblu ma'aminim bishmo natan memshala shiyu bnei ha'elohim. And to all those who accepted him and believe in his name, he gave dominion that they would be sons of Elohim. Asher hem lo midam velo michefetz habasar adam. For they were not born out of blood and not out of the desire of flesh. Not out of the desire of men, but from Elohim. I mean, this is, and then it ends. Like, what's next? I don't know.
The last word on the page.
The last word is Elohim, which means God, or the one God, the true God. And then it ends. And we don't know what's next. And who knows if that's someone. I mean, think about it. The conspiracy always is the Vatican's hiding it. No, quite literally, the Vatican was so incompetent, they don't even know what they have. They had no idea. It's just in the junk box. Now, again, is this the original Hebrew? I don't know. All I know is this is a Hebrew. I mean, this is what we dreamed of as a scholar, certainly. You dream of finding something like this, the lost Gospels in the Vatican. And here we have 4 pages from a lost Gospel in the Vatican. And it's not that they were hiding it to be malicious. They just didn't know. Now, I want to tell you a story, Michael. I heard this when I was in elementary school. I went to an ultra-Orthodox elementary school in Chicago, and we had this man come. He was a rabbi, and he told us how he would go into the Vatican at the time, and they wouldn't allow him to bring pen and paper, but they would allow him to study the manuscripts. So he would walk in there into the library, go through all the check, make sure he's not, no, of course he can't bring a camera, and we're talking the 80s, right? He's not bringing a phone, it wasn't possible back then. He wasn't allowed to bring pen and paper. He had to go in, memorize a line of one of the manuscripts, run out after about an hour, write down everything he could remember, go back in again. And this man must have had a photographic memory. That's how he was doing it in the 80s. And now anybody who's listening to this program can go to my website, nehemiahswall.com, and see the full text and translation. You can, and there will be a link there to the Vatican website where you can see the original document here. You don't have to believe me. You can see it for yourself. I mean, think what a miracle this is. We go from where the rabbi is sitting there memorizing the text, and he's probably not interested in this text. He's memorizing the manuscript of the Mishnah they have there and other documents. And we've now gone to the point where at a click of a button, you can find these things. Like, it's a miracle, Michael. Michael, this is a miracle.
Knowledge is increasing.
Knowledge
We're
is increasing.
To and fro with our computers at the speed of nanoseconds.
It's incredible, Michael, what's going on here. Well, now can I read a little bit from Luke? I don't think we have time for the whole thing.
Okay. Well, let's do this. Everyone, get out a pen, get out your Bibles. This is the time that you can actually mark in your Bibles and bring it right back to the Hebrew.
Okay, I'm not going to read the whole thing because I see where the time is flying. But I'm going to read part of it. Okay.
Okay. All right.
The holy gospel or good news of Yeshua the Messiah, Hamashiach, the Mashiach, according to Luke or Luca. And I'm going to
Wow, that's a lot more full than the King James has.
Is it? Well, I mean, that's what it says here.
Yeah, well, beautiful.
And people can see it. They see it here now on the screen. For the first time, this is being shown publicly.
King James, the gospel according to Luke.
That's all you got there,
Yeah,
right?
that's all we got.
Okay, here it is. By the way, I just got to point out here, the name here is written as Yeshua, which is a name that appears in Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 17, referring to Joshua the son of Nun, meaning there's no question from any serious scholarship about how to pronounce that name, Yeshua. No question whatsoever.
Right.
And this is how it's documented in these Hebrew documents that we find in the Vatican and other Hebrew documents. And this one's with vowels, Michael. That's one of the really cool things. Now, I'm gonna skip over the introduction. People can go to my website, nehemiahswall.com, and see that. If you'll allow me to start with chapter 1. And it came to pass in the days of Herod. I'll read it in Hebrew. Vayhi b'mei Hordos melech Yehuda kohen echad u'shmo Zechariah b'bnei Aviyah v'ishto m'bnei Aharon u'shma Elisheva. I'm going to translate up to there. And it came to pass in the days of Herod, king of Judah, a certain Cohen, a priest, his name was Zechariah, from the sons of Aviyah, and his wife was from the children of Aaron, and her name was Elisheva. And this is it, Michael. This is the part that when I saw this,
all right,
in the early 2000s, I was in the library, and it was every fiber of my being. I had a fight not to shout when I saw this. Vayihiyu shnehem tzadikim. And they both were righteous, lifnei Yehovah, before Yehovah. And there in the Hebrew manuscript of Luke from the Vatican, you can see it here on your screen, people. There it is. It says, tzadikim, righteous, lifnei Yehovah. Righteous before Yehovah. And Yehovah has the full vowels, which we now know from over 1,000 Hebrew manuscripts of the Old Testament. We've seen this in the Hebrew Revelation, Sloan 273 from the British Library, and now we're seeing it in the Hebrew text of Luke from the New Testament, from the Vatican junk box. Yehovah with the full vowels, that was known to be the pronunciation of his name. This is incredible.
It is.
Okay, it goes on. And it
this
says,
is beautiful.
All right, it goes on. All right, I mean, this is incredible stuff. It says, "V'holchim b'chol chukei u'mishpatei Yehovah," and walking in all the statutes and judgments
of Yehovah.
Bilti orma, without craftiness, which is really interesting. What do you have there in your English, in your King James?
We're blameless. Yeah, they're blameless, walking in all the ordinances, commandments of Yehovah, blameless.
Wow. So that's a really interesting kind. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, because they're Cohen. From both of them from Aaron, they have so many more things that they have to perform than the average Israelite, and still they were blameless.
So here it doesn't say blameless in Hebrew; it says without craftiness. And what I understand when I read that in Hebrew is, we've got this commandments, but there's always ways to get around the commandments, and this is something the rabbis are masters of. So, for example, it talks about in the Torah, at every 7 year during the Shemitah, during the sabbatical year, that if your poor brother owes you money, that debt is forgiven. So the rabbis come along and they say, hey, that's a lot of money to pass up on. So they create something called the Pruz Bowl. Pruz Bowl is this concept in rabbinical Judaism where you write a certain type of contract, and therefore the debt carries over through the Shemitah and survives, and the man owes that money for the rest of his life until he pays it off. So I think that's what it means, without craftiness.
Oh, that's beautiful.
I mean, you talk about legalism. There's a lot of things in Jewish tradition which are, one of the things the rabbis do, of course, is they create these fences around the Torah, what Yeshua called the heavy burdens, that they load on the people and they won't lift one finger to do them themselves. But then in other instances, they do something different. They say, hey, these commandments are too hard, the ones God actually tells us to do, because we're so busy doing our man-made takanot, our man-made laws, rules, and regulations. So they come up with these loopholes to get out of doing the actual commandments of God. And I think that's what it means when it says without craftiness.
Well, it's interesting. Now, even if we don't get into these other things, at any time like this, just speak up, because that craftiness, the Shemitah, when they started it out, rabbis sold the whole land of Israel to an Arab for the year, so it didn't belong to a Jew, and so they could continue planting and harvesting, and then it reverted back. That craftiness is very evident.
There's a reason Jews are such good lawyers. Well, and I'm not trying to be funny.
No.
Really, they're dealing with, the Torah and trying to think, wow, God commanded us to do that. We don't want to do it. There's got to be some way we can make where we can throw away the spirit of the law, but through the letter of the law, get out of actually doing it. And I think that's what the craftiness is. I mean, Jews are trained to do this. Then you apply that to other laws, and you might make a very good lawyer. Let me jump ahead here. They did not have children. Yhvh was barren, and both of them were advanced in years. And the Kohen Zechariah had the priesthood before, and it says in Hebrew, this is really interesting, it says before Yehovah. In the order of his family, according to the custom of the service of the priesthood, the lot fell upon him to present the incense, and he came into the sanctuary of Yehovah. And that's the first word on the page. We turn the page here, and we get to the top of the page, and literally the first word, it says at the end of the last page, it says the sanctuary of, and the first word there, the upper right, anybody can see it, it says Yehovah, and just like it has every time in this document with the full vowels. Incredible. Okay, let's go on, read a little bit more. Okay, and it says, and all the throng of the people were standing outside to pray at the time of the incense, and the angel of Yehovah appeared to him standing at the right of the altar of incense, and Zechariah, when he saw him, was terrified, and fear seized hold of him. And the angel said to him, do not fear, Zechariah, for your prayer is heard, and Yhvh, your wife, will give birth to a son, and you shall call his name Yochanan, and there shall be to you joy and happiness, and many will be happy at the time of his birth, for he will be great before Yehovah, and will not drink wine or strong drink, and he will be filled from the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, from the womb of his mother, and he will return many of the children of Israel to Yehovah, their Elohim, and he will walk before him in the spirit and power of Eliyahu, to return the heart of the fathers to the sons, and he will return the heretics to the righteousness of the righteous ones. That's pretty cool. That's kind of different what you got in the Greek. And to prepare to Yehovah the people, prepared. Now, I want to stop there for a second, and I don't think we're going to be able to read the whole thing, but I want to go back to the name. We're seeing here the name in a Hebrew gospel from the Vatican junk box with the vowels Yehovah, and there's one more thing I hope we have time to get to, but I want to talk about something about the name. One of the things you hear from scholars, there's actual solid scholarship out there from Gesenius, who we've mentioned him before. He was the great Hebrew grammarian, really, of the last 200 years. And although he got a bunch of things wrong, he really was a great grammarian. One of the things he says is those vowels that people think are the name Yehovah, and in English became Jehovah, those are the wrong vowels. And one of the arguments he brings is what's called the preposition argument. It's called the inseparable prepositions, or more accurately, for those who actually know Hebrew, the inseparable particles. So the inseparable particle argument is that when the name Yehovah is preceded by certain letters that are attached to the word, I don't want to get too complicated here, that the first letter is silent, just like it's in Adonai. And I want to show you what Adonai looks like. Adonai is the way Jews traditionally read this. And here we have a manuscript. This is a manuscript from the Russian National Library, EVR B52. And I call this, Michael, the B52 bomber of Hebrew manuscripts, because this proves definitively, puts to rest the whole issue of the vowels. Now, bear with me, people, for one moment here. You see here on your screen, it says Ladonai. That is the word Adonai with what's called the inseparable preposition or inseparable particle. And the la is attached to the word, and it has the vowel you would expect for Adonai. But one of the important things here is that the first letter of Adonai is silent. Why is it silent? Because in Hebrew you have la-a-donai. So la-a, it's a contraction, just like you say in English cannot, becomes can't. It's a typical contraction. It's called the elision of the aleph in Hebrew linguistics. La-donai, silent aleph. So there's no vowel in the aleph when it has the attached preposition. This is the inseparable particle. No aleph and Adonai. Why do we care about this? This is normal. You find this in every single manuscript, every printed Bible. What we discovered in B52, which became the B52 bomber of Hebrew manuscripts, is that when Yehovah is preceded by the attached preposition, it has the full vowels Yehovah. Now, I just told you the first letter of Adonai is silent. There's no vowel in that letter. And what we've been told for 200 years, since the time of Gesenius, is that the vowels of Yhvh, the vowels of the name, are the vowels of Adonai. And therefore, the vowel in the Yud of Yhvh represents the aleph of Adonai. In fact, in the B52 manuscript, in the B52 bomber, there is no vowel in the Yud. Or let me rephrase that correctly. There is a vowel in the Yud. We expect there to be no vowel based on Gesenius, but in fact, it has the full vowels. And what I can say definitively without question is these are the vowels of the name. They can't be the vowels of Adonai. Now, what does this have to do with the Hebrew Gospels that we discovered in the Vatican junk box that I discovered 17 or 18 years ago? So you open up there, and in Luke, we just read the verse in Luke, and there it says, and to prepare for Yehovah, or to Yehovah the people, and it's La Yehovah with the full vowels. In Adonai, that first letter should have no vowel, but the fact that it has La Yehovah in the B52 bomber Hebrew manuscript, now in over 150 manuscripts of the Old Testament, we know it has this exact same thing. And it's even in the Gospel of Luke in Hebrew, proving definitively from a linguistic perspective that these are the true vowels of the name itself, not the vowels of Adonai, even in the Hebrew Gospel of Luke from the Vatican.
Amen. Amen.
So we've seen the name Yehovah here in this Hebrew Luke from the Vatican. The name Yeshua is also there. Can we get to that?
Oh, okay. All right. Wow, that's what.
All right. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from Yehovah in a city of Galilee, and its name was Nazareth, to a certain virgin. And it's interesting there, the Hebrew word for virgin is Betulah. To a certain Betulah who was betrothed to a man, and his name was Yosef from the house of David. And the name of the virgin, the Betulah, was Miriam. Let me read this now in Hebrew. Ubevo hamalach eleha amar. And when the angel came to her, he said, Shalom lich, meleat chen, Yehovah imach, mevorechet at ben hanashim. He said, and when the angel came to her, he said, Shalom to you, meaning peace. And this is the greeting in Hebrew, shalom to you. She who is full of grace, Yehovah be with you, or Yehovah is with you. And I love that in Hebrew, because that's exactly what Boaz said to the harvesters in Ruth, and it's exactly what the angel said to Gideon. And in the Mishnah, it says that this is the way the ancient Israelites would greet one another in the name, saying, Yehovah be with you, Yehovah with you. And that's what the angel says to her.
And this is one of Ruth's descendants.
Wow. Yehovah be with you. You are blessed among women. And she looked and was frightened because of his words. And she was thinking, what sort of shalom was this? Meaning he said to her, shalom to you. And she's thinking, what sort of shalom was this? What sort of peace is this? Or greeting? And the angel said to her, do not fear, Miriam, for you have found favor before Yehovah. Behold, you are pregnant and will give birth to a son. I'm going to read this in Hebrew. V'karat shmo Yeshua. And you will call his name Yeshua. Ze yehieh gadol. This one will be great. V'yikareh ben elyon. And he will be called Son of the Most High. V'yiten lo Yehovah kiseh David aviv. And Yehovah Elohim will give him the throne of David his father. V'yimloch al beit Yaakov le'olam. And he will reign over the house of Yaakov, of Jacob, forever. And there will be no, there will be no end to his kingdom. And Miriam said to the angel, how will this be? For I have not known a man. And the angel answered and said to her, the spirit of holiness will enter you, and this is interesting, and an exalted might will be in your shadow or in your protection, which is not quite what it says in the Greek. It's very interesting.
Right.
And I got to read this part in Hebrew. And this is the end, the last words here in Luke. Al asher yeh hanolad kadosh yikareh ben Yehovah. Because he that will be born will be holy, he shall be called Ben Yehovah, son of Yehovah. And that's what we find in the junk box in the Vatican.
That, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't get any better from the junk box in the Vatican than that right there. That is just incredible.
And it's just been sitting there for who knows how many centuries, and they don't even know they have it.
And there it is, right in the Hebrew. There's no other way to pronounce it. Yeshua.
It's written right there with the vowels.
And the same thing in the Hebrew Matthew. It's the same.
Absolutely. And look, there's people who say Yahshua and things like that.
I was one of those people. I think I've got a DVD on it.
Well, I mean, I could only call that pseudo-Hebrew because the way those letters are written can't be pronounced Yahshua. I mean, it's just not, it doesn't fit the rules of Hebrew phonology, and maybe we'll do one of the Q&As on that. But, and what's interesting is there isn't a doubt, there isn't a debate in Jewish and scholarly literature about the name Yeshua. The only real debate is about the name Yhvh, whether those are the vowels of Adonai or those are the actual vowels of the name, and then the whole Yahweh thing. We talked about that in an earlier episode, and really this document, along with over 150 manuscripts of the Old Testament with the B-52 bomber, with the definitive proof that has what's called the inseparable preposition, proves definitively that is actually the vowels of the name Yehovah. It can't be the vowels of Adonai. And Michael, I mean, I am so blessed. You know, people would, often say, what period of history do you want to live in? And look, okay, I would have liked to have been at Mount Sinai. But other than that, maybe to have met Yeshua. Other than that, there's no other period of history I want to have lived in up until now, except other than today.
Right now.
Right now, this moment, we're living in a period where knowledge is increasing, as it talks about in the book of Daniel. I feel like we're living in what it describes in the book of Acts, where it talks about the restoration of all things. Can you read that, Michael?
Yeah,
I think we're living in that period of history.
The times of refreshing shall come from the presence of Yehovah, and he shall send Yeshua, Messiah, which before was preached unto you, whom the heaven must receive until the times of the restitution or restoration of all things, which God has spoken by the mouth of the holy prophets since the world began. This is a time that was promised. And in Nehemiah, why do you see these discoveries? Why are they so important in our time? Because the Jews are looking for the coming of the Messiah. Here, these Jews were saying that the heavens must receive the Messiah until the restoration of all things. And we're seeing things restored that we never imagined. The Gentiles could have never have imagined the stuff that's going on right now.
Well, Michael, I see this as part of a pattern, a pattern of history of restoration. And it's interesting, he doesn't just say, this isn't a new doctrine, he said. This restoration is something spoken of by the prophets. So when I hear that, I say, well, which prophets? And I look at what's happened really since starting in the 1800s, we had the return of the Jews to the land of Israel. They were scattered throughout the diaspora and began to return in large numbers in the 1800s. We have the restoration of the Hebrew language, which is prophesied in Zephaniah. We'll get to that in a minute. The return of Jewish sovereignty after 2,000 years. The liberation of the Temple Mount and the rest of Jerusalem. I mean, we have a psalm about how Jerusalem is united as a city, and it actually happened in 1967. Mm-hmm. The restoration of the calendar, the restoration now of the name, and the discovery of these Hebrew Gospels. I have to wonder if this isn't part of this whole pattern of restoration. And I'm not a Christian, I'm not a Messianic Jew, but I'm seeing these restorations of these ancient Hebrew documents. I think this could be part of the pattern. And it gets me excited, Michael, because I asked the question, Michael, what's next? If we've seen all these things restored in our lifetime, many of these in my lifetime, things you'd never expect to have happened. I mean, I've shared this with you before on the program about how in the 80s, the Jewish leadership was talking how it would take centuries to liberate the Jews from the Soviet Union. And now over 1 million Jews have returned. I mean, in the return of the Jews from Ethiopia, we are seeing restoration, people waking up around the world and realizing they've been called to the God of Israel. That's the Isaiah 56 prophecy. Michael, I want to read one prophecy to you. Jeremiah 32:41. This is part of what it's talking about in Acts 3:21. So what's really interesting about this verse, let me read it. And this is talking about the return of the exiles, God bringing the exiles back and planting them in their land. He says, I will rejoice over you to do good to you, and I will plant them in this land in truth with all my heart and with all my soul. And you know, Michael, in the entire Bible, it talks repeatedly about loving God with all your heart and all your soul. It's in the Shema. When they asked Yeshua what's the most important commandment, he said to them, Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, Yehovah Eloheinu, Yehovah Echad. Yehovah is our Elohim, Yehovah is one. And then he says, Ve'ahavta et Yehovah Elohecha. And you shall love Yehovah with all your heart, Ubechol nafshecha ubechol meodecha, and with all your soul and all your might. And in all of the entire Bible is only one place where God says he will do something with all his heart and all his soul. And that is planting the people of Israel back in their land. So when we hear, that's not some small trivial thing. That is the only thing God ever said he'll do with all his heart and all his soul. And he's done it. It's begun to happen. It hasn't been completed. We still have millions of Jews in the diaspora and the 10 lost tribes. And so there's ways to go, but it's beginning to happen, and God does that with all his heart and soul.
Oh, that's incredible. And Jeremiah 32, this is right after he receives a revelation that his cousin is going to come in to the prison and offer for Jeremiah to buy some land, and he puts the title deeds in earthen vessels and to bury it in that land. Mm-hmm. And he says that this is going to happen, that Israel is going to come back one day. Mm-hmm. And
I love that prophecy because I know where Jeremiah was from. I've been to that place, the village of Anatot, and it talks. I mean, it's an incredible image there. They're buying and selling land, and they're like, "You're going to want to buy land? This is worthless. The Babylonians are about to take the land."
Right, they got the siege wall around Jerusalem.
Right, you want land? I mean, it's like buying swampland in Florida, right? I mean, what would you want this for? And his point is that this prophecy will be fulfilled, and now we look back, and the prophecy has been fulfilled. Now the nations of the world don't want this. They're murmuring and they're speaking against Yehovah and against his Messiah, like it talks about in Psalm 2. They wanted to, the UNESCO has made this proclamation that the Jews have no historical connection to Jerusalem. Jeremiah wrote this, whether you believe in God or not, there's no disputing Jeremiah wrote this in around 586 BC. We know the date from archaeology. So he wrote this in 586 BC. And he's talking there about how God will do this with all his heart and soul, plant the Israelites back in their land. And UNESCO says that there's no connection between the Jews and the land. What are they talking about? I mean, it's insanity. I mean, I feel like sometimes I'm in that movie with Planet of the Apes. It's a madhouse in here, a madhouse. I mean, you're dealing with the United Nations. They are delusional.
Well, they need to pass a resolution against ignorance and stupidity, but they'd have to
no
jail
members.
them all.
Right.
Okay.
Well, so there's another prophecy here, Michael, which is two key prophecies I want to bring. One is Zephaniah chapter 3. This is one of the key prophecies in the Bible about the restoration of all things that he talks about in Acts 3:21. For then I will turn to the ki az efoch el amim safa brura. For then I will turn to the people's pure language, likro kulam b'shem Yehovah la'avdo shchem echad. To call all of them upon the name of Yehovah to serve him with, literally says, one shoulder. And the image there is everyone is standing shoulder to shoulder in a line, serving Yehovah together. Now, what is the image here of Zephaniah 3:9? When I read this, it's immediately clear to me that Zephaniah 3:9 is an undoing of the curse of the Tower of Babel. What happened at the Tower of Babel in Genesis is all the nations came together and they had one language, and that language was Hebrew. And what did they use that Hebrew for? They said, let's build for ourselves a name, and we'll rebel against God. And God then scattered them throughout the world and gave them different languages so they couldn't do that. And he's saying that curse will be undone, and in the end times, we'll all come together once again with a single language, with a pure language, that original Hebrew that was the language of creation. All mankind will speak that language once again, not to build for themselves a name, but to call upon the name of Yehovah, to serve him and not themselves, not to build their tower, but to build up the name of Yehovah with one shoulder. Yeah. And we're in the beginning of that process, Michael. This can't happen until first the Jews restore their own language. You know, there was this big debate in the 1800s in the Jewish world in Europe. There were 4 daily newspapers in Hebrew. People couldn't speak Hebrew, but they could read and write in Hebrew. And people said, wait a minute, this isn't our language. That's some language of some ancient prophets who are now dead. We should make Yiddish the national language of the Jewish people. And the Jewish people as a whole rejected that. They said Yiddish was the language of the exile, the language of the diaspora, the language of our slavery. We must restore the pure language of the prophets. And I believe that's part of what's going on here. This is part of the prophecy of Zephaniah 3:9. We're witnessing it happening in front of our eyes, almost in slow motion. One more prophecy, Michael. Zechariah 14, verse 9. I love this prophecy.
And this is part of all the prophets have spoken from the beginning. This is a restoration.
This is what Acts 3:21 is about.
They know this. They know this.
Absolutely. Now, I'll tell you one of the reasons I love this verse, Michael. It's actually the closing verse of the daily prayers in traditional rabbinical Judaism. Now, I was raised as an Orthodox Jew, but at a certain point in my upbringing, I'm like, all these prayers, we would have prayers 3 times a day, every day. And it was prayers by rote, and I would often come at the end because I was ditching. I just couldn't do it, standing there for 45 minutes, the same prayers day after day by rote. But I would come to this, and it would be sung. It's part of the Adon Olam. V'haya Yehovah lemelech al kol haaretz. And it shall come to pass that Yehovah will be king over the entire earth. Bayom hahu yihyeh Yehovah echad. And on that day Yehovah will be echad. He'll be one, ushemo echad. And his name will be one. And the rabbis in the Talmud talk about this. I only discovered this later, that in the Talmud they say, what does this verse mean, his name will be one? And I talk about this in my book, Shattering the Conspiracy of Silence. What does it mean his name will be one? They say today in the exile, we call upon, instead of saying Yhvh, we say Adonai. And in the end times, we'll all call upon the name, the entire earth, all mankind. His name will be one. We won't read the letters Yhvh and speak them as Adonai. We'll speak them the way they're written, with those vowels, Yehovah. And in my teaching I did, and this is in the Gentiles shall know my name teaching, I bring the source Rabbi Jacob Bachrach from the year 1890, who brings this verse and brings the Talmudic passage. And he says, when it says that we'll read it the way it's written, it means with the vowels, which proves back then they knew what the vowels were, and these are still the true vowels, Yehovah. And so what I see happening is that this explosion of information is part of the fulfillment of this prophecy to restore the name, restore the language, restore the people, and just restore the truth. It's part of the restoration of all things. Having said all that, Michael, this explosion of information is a double-edged sword. It's a great blessing, but there's also great danger in it. And we need to confront that danger and deal with it. I want to just quickly tell the story about Dr. Mark. Dr. Mark is this dear friend of mine, and I'll tell more about it later, but he was struggling with this situation where he had stopped believing in Yeshua. And he had gotten to the point where he was just at the edge of like, I can't continue to believe in this in good conscience because I've seen all this evidence that Yeshua is not the Messiah. And where did he get this evidence? He tells me, I did an interview with him on my Hebrew Voices podcast. He says, I asked Rabbi Google. Meaning he had these questions trying to understand the Jewish perspective, and he Googled it, and he came to the conclusion, if everything they're telling me is true, and he's a doctor, a medical doctor, and he has a degree in theology, he came to the conclusion, in my heart I believe this, but my head is telling me I can't keep believing this. And what ended up happening is I, the Karaite Jew, he asked me to convince him to believe in Yeshua. He said, if you're going to argue both sides of the argument and understand the New Testament side, could you argue me to believe in Yeshua? And I did.
And do you believe in Yeshua today?
I do, absolutely. But, you believe that Yeshua existed. That was another fun conversation we had was, I had a friend at the time who had gotten on some websites and completely believed that no man by that name existed in the first century, which is ludicrous.
Right.
We know that historically this was an event. And I have just loved in your ministry the way you pursue truth, you share knowledge, and part of your understanding of ancient documents and ancient languages allowed me to realize that those New Testament documents were not setting out to fool us, to hoodwink us. They were a legitimate way of conversing with those Tanakh texts. Nehemiah, probably to summarize the whole event, you made it so that I could still believe in Yeshua.
Wow. Okay, so now I've got to do what my friend Keith would call damage control, because there's going to be some Jews out there who want to tar and feather me. What on earth am I doing? Essentially helping you salvage your faith in Yeshua. And look, I believe God does everything, right? If I was there at that moment, then I was a tool that he wanted me to use for his purposes. Because their approach, or the approach of some Jews, is there's no reason you should be talking about Jesus or Yeshua unless it's to convince people to deny him. And that's not what I feel called to do.
This could get you in hot water with the rabbinate.
I don't care. Everything I said was truth.
Yeah.
And so let him come after me. I really don't care. I never, look in
right. You unsprung the trap that that a lot of rabbis set for people because they don't know Hebrew.
Well,
American Christians just don't know the background of the Bible, and
I don't think these rabbis are trying to be deceptive. I think they're trying to answer the question for a Jewish audience. Hey, we don't believe in Yeshua. And based on that, how do we interpret these verses? And how have they been historically interpreted by our people? Michael, we're living in this incredible period. 1,034 Hebrew Bible manuscripts with the name Yehovah. We've got all these documents that nobody has studied. The Hebrew scholar in Israel literally told me that they don't care. They're not interested. That's just Christian stuff. So who knows what treasures are still to be found in the Hebrew epistle of James, the Hebrew epistle of Jude that's in the British Library.
This is one of the things that we're doing on the break, going through Jude, the Hebrew Jude, and this is an epistle that he's telling the people to earnestly contend for the faith that was once delivered to the saints. This is part of the restoration, because at the end of the first century, it was already being lost. Paul, Shaul admitted it. All those in Asia had turned away from him. He spent 2 years and 3 months at one school, the school of Tyrannus, and teaching them, and yet they had turned away from him at that time. He mentions by names the people that have turned away and gone to the dark side, and there in Jude, he said that we must earnestly earnestly contend to restore the faith that was once delivered to the saints. That faith that Yeshua and his disciples, what they were teaching, what they were promulgating, was being lost at that time. And so if we think in the Christian world, in the Christian church, that we have the faith once delivered to the saints, that was lost centuries ago, millennia ago. But yet Yeshua said, I will declare your name, I will make it known, and I have made it known. And he said he would send the Holy Spirit to lead us into all truth, and that's why we need the Spirit to lead us into all truth. As Nehemiah was talking in Jeremiah, in this prophecy in Jeremiah, that he would send fishers and they would fish them out of their exiles. And then he would send hunters and they would hunt them out of the exiles. And this is what he was talking about. In the 1800s, there were Jews that were coming back to Israel. They were waking up and coming back to Israel. But most of the Jews in Germany were saying, we're more German than we are Jewish. And they were living like kings in Europe.
Michael, I'm actually going to be giving a lecture at this university. They invited me to come speak about the Holocaust. And I said, what I really want to share, what's in my heart, is something called I call it the Lost Scrolls of Auschwitz. And I had no idea about this until a few years ago. It turns out that some of the Jewish slaves whose job it was to pull the bodies out of the gas chamber and burn them, they wrote their accounts of what happened, and these were discovered by the Poles afterwards in these piles of ashes. And we can read these now today. And one of the things he shares is how these Jews are about to be put into the gas chambers. And there's this old Rebbitzin, the wife of a rabbi, and she gets really angry. She said, our rabbis have been telling the people, don't leave, that Hungary is our home, that we shouldn't go back to the land of Israel. And now look what's happened. And I pray to Yehovah every day that we don't have another Holocaust. But there's a reason that the Jews have a country and a place to flee to. There are Jews today in my neighborhood who come from France. I hear French all over my neighborhood in Jerusalem today. Yeah. And they're there as refugees. Because if a Jew walks down the streets in France with a kippah and tzitzit who looks like a Jew, he'll be attacked. And there was this liberal leftist journalist who doubted this in Malmö, Sweden, and went there, and the person was attacked. And he said, okay, the Jews are telling the truth. You can't live in Europe anymore as a Jew without being attacked in these certain areas that have been taken over by other populations.
Well, the fishers fished them out. Herzl, they fished them out, and then the hunters hunted them out from behind every rock and in every cave. And ladies and gentlemen, part of what happens is Israel comes back into the land. The Gentiles then start coming to Israel from the ends of the earth and crying out in repentance. And the Almighty, because they repent, the Almighty makes his name known. And what is his name? In over 1,000 Hebrew manuscripts,
his name is Yehovah.
And so this is the time that the restoration of all things is beginning. And that means to those believers, that means that Yeshua has to remain in heaven until the restoration of all things, and then the Messiah comes.
All right, Michael, I want to read one last prophecy if we have time. Isaiah 66, verse 20. It's talking about the nations. It said, then they will bring all your brothers from the nations as an offering to Yehovah. The nations are involved in restoring the Jews and the Israelites to the land of Israel. And when I hear about these organizations that are actually doing this, fulfilling prophecy, I say we truly are in this period of things being restored. And I hope soon that I pray soon. Can I end in prayer?
Please do.
Yehovah Avinu Sheba Shamayim, send us your son, Father. Send us the Mashiach, Yehovah, whoever you have planned, who is your son, Yehovah. Let us know him soon. Let him be here on earth soon to restore all things, to bring that final restoration to the world. In your holy name, Yehovah. Amen.
Amen. Wow. Shabbat Shalom. Shavua Tov. See you next week after a good week.